And then it leads into one of your great poems. Well, Mr. Wallenfels taught us well.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Talk about that teacher. Talk about also some of the other teachers in your life, education and not, that may have influenced your life, if not your art.
Did you read this online at another website first? Because this was one of those things that I put online where I
Yes,
had.
years ago. Years
Yeah.
ago, and the poem was destroyed in its use. It was made to look like a prose poem in the version I read, and then when you sent me this manuscript, I seen how it was actually broken properly.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Wallenfels, it's interesting. My Jessica and I were walking this morning. I was talking about. I had two science teachers in junior high school. One was this coked up guy that I use his real name in the memoir. For all I know, he had died of AIDS. He had beaten up some kids in the school. He was a drug addict who died of AIDS in like the late '80s. My sister and some of her friends had told me this. And then years later, when I had this online, this fat girl who I knew in junior high, now a teacher, had befriended me or wanted to be my friend on Facebook, but she didn't really want to. She just wanted to sort of berate me and have me change the name of the teacher who she claimed was still alive. But I said, well, give me his thing. I'll ask him. But so this Mr. Wallenfels was the good science teacher. The other guy was the bad science teacher. Mr. Wallenfels was, I think he was originally from England, although he had very little, if any, English accent. He had this afro. He was this white guy with sort of this orangey afro. He wore John Lennon type eyeglasses. I remember he had brought a Vietnam veteran in one day to talk about the choice he made having to kill this young girl who could have betrayed his position and how it always affected him. He had bananas. This was 77, 78. I had him as a teacher. He putting condoms on bananas. What else? There was couple of other things that here talked about. Let's see.
Are you looking at the poem directly, Dan,
Yeah,
or the prose?
I'm looking at the poem.
Okay, well, one of the things about the poem is that it leads into that memory of the Vietnam veteran. But it's interesting how I've spoken about this to a few people before. You can't take a formal structure and then break it for no reason. So this one begins in a structured sense, and then it completely and totally drifts off into fractal little lines that move off the page, and that's in connection with this memory, and then it realigns itself at the end. That's a great technique, and it shows just based on the visuals of how you break the poem how you can add extra things to the speaker rather than just simply go off of what the lines are saying themselves.
Right, and this is what we talked about the last time with people like Wilfred Watson or Bill Bissett or Bob Grumman. These people had no fucking clue as to why they bring it. Oh, I'm going to break this here. There has to be a reason why something is broken here. For example, in part of this poem here, and let's see, I'll just read a few lines here. As a supernova silent beauty break, incinerating civilization's dreams and youth break, yet familiar break like a gorilla's break, inviting the brief interplay break of two-third chimps lost break from the trees break of nothingness. Now, even right there, there's probably more poetry in that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines than, like I said, you're going to find in all of the works of a Dave Eggers or a David Foster Wallace. But they're broken, and one could argue maybe you could have a line a little farther to the left or a little farther to the right, but that in a sense is irrelevant. For like here, from the trees of nothingness, there's a break directly underneath from the trees.
This is also one of those poems that makes it look easy too, because you'll see writing, whether it's prose or poetry, that looks hard because of how structured it is. You can almost tell the writer spent hours and hours and hours editing it. But this one almost has a hash and stash way of breaking things.
Yeah.
But they're broken for a reason, and each line break adds something to it. Even if it seems at first dissonant, it will make sense in further rereadings.
Yeah, and then you get back to the last stanza where you're more structured again, and I have the last lines that go, right or wrong, immense or we, everlasting or singular, that kept, break, some apes still swinging through ancient trees, that kept, break, poor Chamberlain, Neville Chamberlain is referring to, warm in some peace, that kept, break, my favorite teacher smiling on and on. Now, if you look at a line like my favorite teacher smiling on and on, that in and of itself is not inherently poetic with an ellipsis or not. But in writing, you have to know that one of the things that bad poets do, and even bad prose writers, is they try to be poetic rather than letting a natural poesy come from non-poetic things. You can have, just as you can bang on some lunch pails, you can bang on garbage cans, and that's just dissonant noise. But someone can organize that dissonant noise in interesting ways. I saw, for example, I've been melancholy these last few months that I've been out of work, and I've watched a lot of things that harken back to my youth. I recently, just a few nights ago, watched Godspell, the film of the Broadway musical, and I'm not religious or whatnot, but just the its use of, for like the famous song, day by day, oh dear Lord, three things I pray. These things brought back memories of that era, hippie girls, when I was a child or a baby, and there's a comforting nature about it, and yet there's a few scenes where they're banging on things in a junkyard, like from Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, a TV show, a cartoon in the 1970s. That was like where I grew up, around a lot of these junkyards, and you get these things that aren't inherently musical, but you can take the dissonant sound and make noise from it, and that's a good example in that film, or that I don't know if they did it on stage like that, and to take prosaic lines and put them in poetic ways, so that the poetry isn't contained within each line. The poetry is formed by the way the lines are juxtaposed.